Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 6, Episode 6, Blood of My Blood. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Game of Thrones, so I have to give a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 6, Episode 6. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain other kinds of spoilers, like from the novels or production leaks, so you will be safe from those kinds of spoilers. So this was probably one of the weaker episodes of the season, being mostly set up, but I wouldn't by any means call this a bad episode. It was still a good, solid Game of Thrones episode with some great scenes and interesting revelations. It was probably the most focused out of all the episodes this season thus far, as it focused on fewer locations, whereas most episodes, even last week's, had a bit more locations. With this week, we just got Bran north of the Wall, Arya and Bravo, Sam and Hornhill, King's Landing, and a brief scene with Daenerys in the Dothraki Sea, and a brief scene with Walder Frey at the Twins. This was the first episode that we didn't get Jon and Sansa, nor Tyrion and Meereen, and the Iron Islands also didn't appear, so it was a more focused episode, which is always pretty interesting. So let's start with Bran north of the Wall, where they follow up from the harrowing events from last week's episode, where Meera is pulling Bran on a sled trying to get away from the attacking Whites. Bran is still in his warg/Greenside's trance, but instead of just hanging out in Winterfell, he seems to be experiencing a load of different events. Now, the flashes we got in the show were mostly comprised of the footage from previous episodes, which makes sense, as it's a way to save money by reusing old clips, as it hardly seems practical to film a whole bunch of scenes that just appear in a brief flash that lasts less than a second. We see a lot of clips from Hardhome, as well as clips pertaining to the Starks, including Ned and Robb's deaths, and Bran being thrown from a tower. I don't really think these clips have any significance beyond simply the White Walkers and the Starks being on Bran's mind. And of course the show simply had to use clips that they already had. For example, I don't think Hardhome in particular still bears some great significance. We just saw a lot of it because there were a lot of juicy clips of the White Walkers that they could use. However, what's more important is that we did get some original footage in these flashes, mostly having to do with the Mad King saying burn them all, and also a few glimpses of Jaime going to kill him, and some of the pyromancers playing with wildfire. So I'd say it mostly has to do with the time around the Mad King's death, where according to Jaime, his last words were burn them all. So it's interesting that they chose this to be the original thing to show in these flashes that weren't just reused clips. And this does make me think they will play some significance soon. Now, it's been a popular fan theory that Bran will end up being responsible for driving the Mad King mad, and this could be seen as foreshadowing for that, but I personally hope that is not the case, and would argue it may not necessarily be the case, as they emphasize in these flashbacks was more on the Mad King's death and the pyromancers and his desire to burn the city. If Bran was the one who drove the Mad King mad, it would have happened years earlier, as the Mad King was mad for quite some time before his death. Plus, madness tends to be a Targaryen trait, so I really don't think Bran is responsible, but I could be wrong. At any rate, I think it's more likely Bran will be a part of the Mad King's last few moments of death, or will witness this, something significant from that time, but we'll see. So Meera collapses from exhaustion, and Bran finally wakes up, but announces that they've found them. So Bran seems to have gained more abilities and some sort of omniscient knowledge. But right when Meera is ready to give up and to despair, a hooded figure on horseback shows up, starting to kick some white ass, and saves Bran and Meera as they hop on his horse and ride away. Now, it's important to note here that this is not the bulk of the army of the dead, as there were no White Walkers present, as I believe it was just a few spare whites who were searching for them that happened to come across them, which is why I believe this hooded figure was able to defeat them so easily. So I'm perfectly fine with it, and I thought the scene worked really well. So later we see Bran and Mira resting in relative safety as the hooded figure prepares food for them. Then the hooded figure removes his hood and reveals he is Benjen Stark. This doesn't surprise me too much, as last year we got a mention of Benjen Stark and we saw him as a child in several flashbacks this season, so it did seem like the show was reminding us who he was, since we hadn't seen him since season 1, to prepare us for his return. So Bran asks what happened to him. He explains that he traveled with a party north of the Wall looking for White Walkers, but were found by them and stabbed and left to die. But the Children of the Forest found him and halted the White Walkers' magic by doing the same thing that they did to create the White Walkers, by stabbing dragon glass through his heart. So Benjen looked a bit off, like he wasn't quite himself, as he looked really pale, and the method he described would seem to suggest he is some sort of White Walker hybrid. However, in service to the Children of the Forest and the Three-Eyed Raven, as he seems to know things about Bran that he couldn't possibly know, which solidifies that he isn't just normal Benjen, but some sort of magical version of him. And just as I predicted, I feel that they melded his character with a book character named Cold Hands, as in the inside the episode, D.B. Weiss refers to him as Cold Hands Benjen. Now, whether or not this means Cold Hands in the novels is Benjen Stark is a discussion for another time, but regardless of what occurs in the novels, it's clear that here in the show that this is the case, and Cold Hands Benjen will be an important character going forward, who's going to be helping Bran in his fight against the White Walkers, as he even directly tells Bran here that he is the Three-Eyed Raven, and that he will be ready to face the Night King when he comes. So definitely some major foreshadowing going on here. So next, let's go down to Hornhill, where Sam returns home with Gilly, and I'm entirely sure that the internet will bash these scenes to no end, as it often hates whenever Sam and Gilly appear on screen together. But personally, I didn't have a problem. Sure, it wasn't the most interesting storyline in the world, but I wasn't bored either. So Sam arrives at Hornhill after leaving Castle Black in last year's finale, so it actually takes him the right amount of time to travel that long distance. So I guess Sam doesn't have access to Littlefinger's magic teleporter, where so many other people like Theon seem to be borrowing it lately. So anyway, Sam preps Gilly for meeting his family, but leaves out a very important detail about how he wants her to lie about being a wildling. And after she asks, he tells her to avoid the subject, but doesn't come up with a good cover story, such as where in the north she is from, and then telling her about some of that area so she'd be able to fake it. But instead, he doesn't prepare her at all, so obviously the truth comes out. So they meet as Sam's mother and sister, who are lovely and treat Gilly kindly, and Gilly, for her part, is completely in awe at Hornhill, and the castle and how green it is, and I kept thinking about how Ygritte was so impressed by a simple windmill, so I could imagine how overwhelmed Gilly must have felt. So Gilly gets bathed and dressed in fancy clothes, and they have dinner with Sam's family, where everyone is being nice to them, and they're having a nice lovely little dinner until Sam's father speaks up and predictably is a total dick, going on about how much of a coward Sam is, and eventually Gilly retorts by saying he is brave, he killed a Thin, and he killed a White Walker on their way down to Castle Black. And as soon as she said this, I knew that Randall would fixate on the warding of it down to Castle Black, and he just ignored completely the part about her saying that Sam can handle a sword and killed and was brave and all this, and focused entirely on where Gilly was from and confronted her about it, and she just said it outright. So then Randall goes off on a tirade about how much Sam sucks, and then he was insulting Gilly, calling her a wildling, whore, and bashing Sam for forcing them to eat with that. So his brother Dickon, for his part, wasn't a dick. But on the other hand, he didn't stick up for Sam either. Sam's mother, however, did stick up for Gilly and took her away when Randall was being a dick to her, and even berated Randall for being a dick. Randall then promised he would look after Gilly and her baby and that they would be raised properly there, but Sam would not be allowed to spend another night in Hornhill ever again. So this was a really noteworthy scene that as far as it goes, that Sam was cowering under his father's attacks, as we saw him more recently change into a more courageous character who stood up to characters like Alistair Thorne, but was obviously, with his father, it was his main weakness, and I totally bought that. In fact, I really liked the way that this played out. But what was more interesting was what happened next, as Sam apologizes for not sticking up for Gilly, but Gilly said that she wasn't mad at him, but mad at that horrible people can treat good people like that and get away with it. So then Sam prepares to leave her behind, and Gilly kisses him and tells him that he's not the person his father thinks he is. And then Sam leaves. And then he comes back in, and I absolutely love this scene. It speaks to the new character Sam has become and how he's been changed by the Night's Watch and has regained his courage as he takes Gilly and tells her that they're just leaving right away and that they belong together. But before they go, he takes his family Valerian steel sword with him, and I absolutely love that. Gilly asks if Randall will come for them to get his sword back, and he was just like, well, he can bloody well try. Personally, I do think that Randall will come after the sword, and so this probably is not the last that we've seen of him. So next, we go to King's Landing, where we get another scene of the High Sparrow trying to manipulate Tommen and succeeding quite well, actually. Tommen still questions whether Marjorie still needs to do a Walk of Atonement, but then Tommen the High Sparrow lets Tommen see Marjorie, who convinces him even further to do whatever the High Sparrow says. And Tommen, being the impressionable young man he is, of course, is won over by this. So the question one might ask here is Marjorie being sincere here? And the answer I would give is, when is Marjorie ever sincere? Although she kind of admits to being a lying manipulator here, I do believe even that is a manipulation, as she's now doing it in order to save Loris. As last we saw, he was completely broken, so I do believe she's doing whatever necessary to get him out of there, and that includes turning Tommen to the cause of the High Sparrow, which plays right into his hands. So next we see Jaime and Mace Tyrell lead a Tyrell army against the Faith Militant in order to prevent Marjorie's Walk of Atonement. And it's funny, this little speech that Mace gives to his troops, where he's clearly trying to give like a Braveheart level inspirational speech, but failing miserably, and Jaime just gives him a sympathetic smile. So the High Sparrow is making his speech about Marjorie in front of the crowd at Baylor Sept when Jaime and the Tyrell troops come storming in with their spears drawn. Jaime demands the High Sparrow return Marjorie and Loris, but he refuses, so Jaime charges up the steps ready for battle, but the crowd appears to be on the High Sparrow's side, and the High Sparrow refuses to appease Jaime, but then announces that Marjorie will not do a Walk of Atonement because she has already atoned by bringing another to the faith, and then walks out Tommen, followed by King's Guard bearing the 7-pointed star. And then Tommen and the High Sparrow announce an alliance between the Crown and the Faith, and everyone cheers. And I love Mace's reaction as he's just like, what's happening? To which later Elena replies, he's beating us, that's what's happening. As the High Sparrow certainly knows how to play a crowd, as he knew the better way to win was through political maneuvering rather than through force. And all this rhetoric that he gives is just BS, as he's essentially just used the situation to gain a stranglehold over the Crown. Next, we see Tommen expels Jaime from the Kingsguard because of his actions against the faith, but he doesn't arrest him and says he will continue to serve the crown, but not in King's Landing. So it seems Tommen is completely being manipulated by the High Sparrow, so I wonder if Cersei is going to try to break this hold that he has over him. And another question I have is once Loras and Marjorie are free, I wonder how Lady Olenna will react to Marjorie, who's basically fucked their whole plan. She'll probably insist that they need to keep up this act until Loras is safe, but I'm not sure Lady Olenna will be contented with that. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to this. So next we see Cersei and Jaime hashing it out, where Jaime reveals he's being sent to lead a Lannister army to retake River Run from the Tullys. However, Jaime doesn't want to go and would rather pay Bronn to gather the best killers he knows to kill the High Sparrow and any other sparrows that they can find. But Cersei is uncharacteristically level-headed and counsels Jaime against this, as it would lead to his death and she needs him around, so instead encourages him to go to River Run to take the castle back so people know not to mess with the Lannisters. Honestly, I didn't really buy this scene, as I don't really agree with her reasoning or that this is how she would react. It seems to reek of plot convenience to me, and plus I'm getting a little frustrated with how slow the King's Landing storyline is moving this season. Last season I thought King's Landing was one of the show's strongest storylines, whereas this year I feel it's one of the weakest, so I really hope that it starts to pick up soon. So next we get over to Braavos, where just as hoped, we see Arya watching the rest of this silly play that's Lannister propaganda of the events that happened earlier in the show, as we see Joffrey and Marjorie's wedding, where Tyrion poisons Joffrey. And I love how Arya was laughing at Joffrey's death, where everyone else was booing and jeering. A few people even looked at her like, what the hell are you doing? In season 4, Arya talked about how she regretted not being the one who killed Joffrey, so it made sense that she would get a kick out of seeing a reenactment of his death. Plus, I'm sure she's laughing at how wrong that they got things. Next reenactment is the scene where Tyrion kills Tywin, but while this is happening, Arya goes backstage to poison Lady Crane's rum, as she is her mark. Now, there are a couple of nods to the book here. First is how Tyrion gives a line about finding out whether or not Tywin Lannister shits gold, which was actually a line from the books during Tywin's death scene. Many book readers expressed disappointment that it wasn't included in the show, so now finally it has been. Also, when Arya is talking to Lady Crane backstage, she gives her name as Mercy, which is the identity that she used during the books, during the events of these scenes, but the book version was quite different. At any rate, Arya formed an affection for Lady Crane, which only grew when they talked more and connected, as Arya actually grew to like her, which I suppose is why she couldn't go through with it. And just when she's about to drink the poisoned rum, she knocks it out of her hand and even goes as far as to warn her that the other actress wants her dead. And then we cut over to see the waif was hanging out there the whole time, overlooking Arya to see if she'd go through with it. So the waif then goes to Jaqen to inform him of what happened, who describes it as a shame, as the girl had many gifts, and then tells the waif to not let her suffer. And so the waif smiles as she goes off to kill Arya. Meanwhile, Arya retrieves Needle, as she is now fully Arya, and I suppose has decided that the assassin life isn't for her, as Arya is really good at killing people, but only for her own purposes. Apparently being assassin for hire isn't for her, but of course now the Faceless Men want her dead, so it looks like things are going to come to a head, so things are finally starting to heat up. However, whatever happens next, I hope that it justifies the need for this storyline's existence, even if that just means that Arya has learned to become an effective assassin because of this training. So she'll return to Westeros a more skilled and dangerous person than she left, but we'll see. So we get a short scene in the twins to see Walder Frey, who we haven't seen since season 3, and it looks like he has a new wife who looks like she's like 13 years old. Yeah, Walder is despicable. So Walder is yelling at his sons for losing Riverrun and demands that they go and take it back, but they retort that several houses in the Riverlands have risen up against them and that the Brotherhood without banners are still attacking them. And here's another mention we haven't heard since season 3. But Walder then brings out Admiral Tully and proposes to use him to get back Blackfish to surrender Riverrun. So as I said, it's been 3 years since we've seen these characters or even heard about what's going on in the Riverlands. So it's great to finally catch up with this and to get a not so gentle reminder on how despicable Walder Frey is. But otherwise, this scene was quite short, but I do appreciate it. So finally, we end the episode with Daenerys as she and Daario lead this massive army of Dothraki back to Meereen. And when Daenerys asks how many ships she will need to return to Westeros with all the Dothraki and all the Unsullied, Daario answers 1,000 ships. Gee, what a coincidence, as I seem to recall just last week someone talking about building a vast fleet of 1,000 ships to give to Daenerys in order to form an alliance. Isn't that such a funny, wild, wacky coincidence? You know, I don't have any major problems with this, but this setup is a tad bit too obvious. Also, what's interesting is Daario asks her what her plans are once she has taken the Iron Throne, and this isn't the first time this question has been asked. And Daario then tells her she's a conqueror, not a ruler, which I think is even more foreshadowing, as when Daario said, "And then what?" You know, talking about after taking the Iron Throne, I almost answered for him saying attack the White Walkers, and I do believe that is the obvious setup that they're going for here, which they keep bringing this up over and over again. The show loves to foreshadow things, and I think that this is obvious foreshadowing that she won't just simply sit on the Iron Throne, but will go on to attack the White Walkers. But that is just my thinking on it. So then Daenerys sees some sand fluttering in the breeze and tells Daario to wait there with the Dothraki. And then she returns riding Drogon, who circles around the Dothraki before landing in front of them to give a strong speech about how they are all her blood riders, and together they will fulfill Khal Drogo's promise to her to attack Westeros and give her the Seven Kingdoms. In fact, she used a lot of the same language that Drogo gave in his original speech. And then they all cheered her on as Drogon screamed his dragon scream, and I got to say, I absolutely love this scene. This was a nice little echo of Mace Tyrell's pathetic inspirational speech earlier, where Daenerys actually knows how to do it properly and gets them all riled up to travel to Westeros and take it for her. And I totally bought that they would back her, especially after seeing her ride this big ass dragon, as they are horse riders after all. So it makes perfect sense the person they'd choose to back and get all excited about would be someone who is riding this big ass, fierce looking, awesome looking dragon. So yes, this was an awesome scene, and this was a great Daenerys moment. I loved it. So, my rating for Blood of My Blood out of 10 is a 7, very good. A rather slow episode where King's Landing and Sam's storylines were interesting but slow moving. A lot of setup going on with Walder Frey and Bran's story, but it was great to finally meet Cold Hands Benjen and to see Arya refuse to kill and gear up for a big confrontation with the Faceless Man. And of course, I absolutely loved the Daenerys Drogon moment. Awesome, classic Daenerys moments. So that's it for my review of Blood of My Blood. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to review episodes of Game of Thrones Season 6. Also be sure to check out my discussion with Abkin Tomko this week, where we'll be joined by special guest Don Willie. You can join us live in the chat Monday night, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US, which will be 9 a.m. Tuesday morning for me here in New Zealand, or watch the recorded version in the archives once it's completed. Also be sure to check out my channel as I do many more videos on shows like Star Trek, Orphan Black, and more, and be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.